You're welcome back to the Big Story segment right here on Business Day Television, the Breakfast Show. Today, we turn our focus on Nigeria's long, complex journey towards true federalism. Joining us is Deji Olatoye, a lawyer, public affairs analyst, and partner at Lodt Law Offices, whose recent Business Day article critically examines why Nigeria's federal structure remains contested and what reforms are urgently needed. We will explore the political, economic, and governance issues shaping this national debate. Thank you for joining us on the show, Mr. Olatoye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. So what inspired you to write this article, and why is the debate around true federalism resurfacing now?
Yes, don't forget that we are currently on another round of constitutional amendments, They have always been since 1999 that we came into this current democracy. And what inspired the article in particular is how we have fixated, we have allowed certain use of language or certain fixation to then freeze us into being more imaginative in actually redesigning the constitutional structure of this country. And in the article that you referred to which you referred, I took on the task of talking about our fixation on true federalism, that term true federalism, that everybody talks about. But really, what it has done is that it gives there's this assumption in it that there is something, a particular thing that is called true federalism, rather than that there should be a fitting federalism for any federation that desires that kind of structure. So that's what inspired it. I thought that what it has done is to give even the cynical people who would not do anything the opportunity to say, well, everybody talks about true federalism, but nobody can define it. Why a former president of this country said that, So I thought the important thing is to in fact say, look, what are the real issues in this country? What are the factors that should determine how we divide power in this country? And not just in how we divide power, and also how we use it, including even in collaborating between people who hold powers on how they can use it. Because don't forget, the most important thing is that government is about service delivery to the people. So no matter how you divide powers, if you are not thinking about how you can use it properly to actually deliver service to the people, then it's essentially it's a jolly ride, that will give you good feelings, but leads to nowhere. So we need to think about not just structure, we also need to think about functional issues, how we can properly design this country, and how we can use those powers to deliver service to our people.
All right. In your assessment, what is the single biggest flaw in Nigeria's current federal arrangement?
Well, I think I'll start with the easy one that everybody agrees to, that the structure of the division of power in the country actually is not fit for purpose. A whole lot of powers that are held by particular tiers of government cannot be properly and efficiently used by them. First, for a number of reasons, and one of them in particular is that one of the principles of federalism, which is about decentralization, of government and taking power as close as possible, to the people, is that the more the tier of governments that is supposed to exercise certain powers should actually be as close as possible, to the people. So look at the security issue that we have, for example. We have our national security and our national defense institutions that seem not to be able to get the hang of it, and states, in part of the fact that you say that state governments, state governors are the chief security officer of their country, that is not aligned with any institution. In fact, you will notice that a few years ago, when the governors of a particular region in the country decided that they wanted to form a network, a security network, the Attorney General of the Federation took up issue at that time that even national security forces were not able to provide answers to these same governors. So you see, that mismatch, that people need to protect their people and unable to do so because they cannot even form institutions, that have sufficient power and that carry sufficient effectiveness to be able to do so. So that is number one. Number two is that no matter how optimally we think we divide powers in the country, there also needs to be cooperation. One of the things that we have not paid attention to in the country is also models of cooperative federalism, some of them that are already happening today, but because we are not talking about them in that sense, we are focused on division of power. And we believe that once we get the right optimal division of power, everybody can just run, their own agenda, and then we are going to be good. But there needs to be also cooperation, in terms of devolution of power, in terms of intergovernment fiscal transfer, in terms of even interstate compact, which is the example that I mentioned before of, particular governments saying we want to come together and form, an effective security force for our people, but that was ultimately weakened, because of the compromise that was reached later that it can only be formed on a state-by-state basis. All of these are things that we need to think about. Local government structure, for example, a whole lot of the problems that are happening in the middle belt of Nigeria, for example, could be solved by a proper design of our local government, And the last time I was with you, I was talking about local government structure, and now we blandly use the idea of local government autonomy broadly as a general rule, which I say, look, a local government should actually function almost as an organ of the state. The only exception to that is when you create autonomy for particular communities because maybe of their minority status and all of that, so that state governments, there are certain cost spheres that even state governments cannot interfere with in their running of the government. So if we have all of these things in perspective, I believe that is when we begin to actually talk about a proper redesign of the federal structure of this country.
All right. Many argue that Nigeria practices unitary federalism. Do you agree, and why?
Well, I hate, hate is such a strong word. I do not like taking on, because once we allow ourselves, it's the same thing I said about true federalism. It's easy for somebody to say, if you say you want true federalism, it's easily dismissible. I mean, I can dismiss it and say, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. Or I ask you what it means, you say something, I ask somebody else proposing true federalism, he says, I say, well, you guys can't even agree, So once once we also say things like, we are only passing a unitary federal structure, it's also easily dismissible. We have a structure that we're practicing today that is not effective and that is not efficient, that doesn't deliver the goods, Yeah, the center is very strong, but we have countries that have strong centers. But it so happens that those countries that also have strong centers also have strong states. In fact, they have strong cities. An example is America. Some cities are very, very strong. But no matter how strong the city is, don't forget the new mayor of New York, who doesn't, himself and the president of America do not see eye to eye, but he's going to Washington, in the next couple of days to actually see the president, because it's not possible to run an important city like New York without having, being able to, have some commonality, with the president on certain issues. And I also know that the president understands that. So there will always be cooperation and all of that. I do agree that in terms of division of power, we need to think about it. I mentioned it before, issues of security, states or at a minimum, regions need to be able to defend and also secure their people. And that's an issue that is very clear in the last so many years. The national architecture has failed the people. So yes, that it's very important to look at the division of power again, but more importantly, it's very important to also look at functional issues, and even areas where there needs to be cooperation, either particularly between the central government, the federal government, and the state governments, and also horizontally between states, regions, across regions, building joint infrastructure, managing them, looking at issues that are common to particular zones and dealing with them with sufficient economies of scale to be able to be effective. Yes, we need to look at all of that, but, there'll never be a time that you say, oh, it's unitary. I mean, I mentioned an example we talk about Britain being a unitary system of government. Functionally, Britain is a federation, but they did it by devolution. So yes, the center has all of this government, but because the center also realizes that, you cannot be making, laws for certain things in Wales or in Scotland, from London, or from Westminster. So you need to be able to devolve powers to this country. In fact, London perhaps runs as a core sphere of function, as in the government, the mayor of London, than many states, say in the Federation of Nigeria, the mayor of New York, So yes, it is the function itself. Now we decide to say which particular tiers of government can actually effectively and have sufficient skin in the game to actually effectively run this particular sphere of power, and we give it to them either by devolution, which is already happening in the energy sector, for example. So you see what's happening in the energy sector, where after so many years, federal government comes, to the realization that you need to give states, power to be able to regulate power, to be able to regulate the issues of power in their territories. Some of the states will be too weak to do that, and that's where something like interstate compact will come in, where I imagine that a few states can come together to actually be able to effectively use that power. Strong states like Lagos, will probably be able to do it, and they've taken a step, they passed the law and all of that. So all of these things are very important, rather than putting tag on it.
So how has centralized control of revenue and resources undermined state development?
Well, when you talk about centralized control of resources, we have in Nigeria what you call federation account, from which a certain formula, then a certain formula is applied to then distribute resources to the states. Of course, apart from funds that come from that source, states can also, in fact, local governments can also generate what you call their internally generated revenue. Now, one of the central purposes of a federal government actually is also redistribution, because yes, states have these functions, they are supposed to perform it, they are supposed to have funds, to perform it. And one of the things that central post has is to be able to say, how do we equitably distribute it, including even by what you call fiscal equalization. But what I find particular in the case of Nigeria is that sometimes you even have double dipping, where, for example, we have used something like population, as a major chunk of the fund that is coming to the states. And then we find other things to be, so we have equalization things like in ecological fund, you have equalization in things like matching funds that the federal government puts into the UB, Universal Primary Education, and all of that. If you ask me, I think the proper way to do it is that, since the whole purpose of making population a key factor in the distribution from the central post, what we should do is that, in my view, we should remove it as a general rule and then focus it on those functions. Education, we know particular areas of the country, there's a wide gap between the rest of the country and particular areas of the country, and there's a population factor in that. Then we need to look at how we put in funds specifically into that. There are particular areas of the country that have more ecological issues than others. We should use equalization to target, and because we haven't done that, we have not been effective in some of our fiscal equalization measures in Nigeria, because there's this broad fund that goes into states that they don't have to account for, whereas the assumption in making population very important is that you then be able to run services, for your people. You'll be able to give them education, you'll be able to provide health for them and all of that, but that is not happening. And so we need to create new institutions again, or new equalization measures again, to target those things, which again is not being effective. Look at the UB fund that I spoke about. There was a report recently that about over 200 billion left on the table by states that need, the funds. simply because they didn't put in the matching fund, you know. So we need to think through all of these things in terms of how we distribute from that central cost into the states.
All right. So, what practical steps do you think Nigeria can take to move from political rhetoric to real federal restructuring?
Yes, one of them is for us to ditch the labels, you know, to just say, look, labels are not important. We have agreed that we are going to be a federation. What things should, you know, affect, I mean, what factors should determine the structure, you know, of our country? And we have, you know, it's no longer rhetorical, it's no longer theoretical. And the failure of governance at particular levels, you know, is just there. You know, states have failed in certain areas, the federal government have failed in certain areas. How can we distribute it? That's very important. So we need to look at, of course, fiscal allocation that we mentioned before, to make sure that where we're going to have equalization, it should be targeted. It shouldn't be just some balloon fund you give to states that they don't have to use to solve the problem that the population creates. You know, so we need to look at that. So we use equalization to target those things, both in states that have need and also for countering negative spillover. It means that some states that actually create opportunities are overwhelmed, because when you have negative spillover from failing states, it overwhelms facilities and the infrastructure in those other states. That's also one of the areas that we should be looking at in terms of our fiscal distribution. I've mentioned local government before. We need to redesign our local government system. States should strictly man their local governments, and federal government should take their eyes off it. But in terms of local government autonomy should be created strictly to actually protect minority groups within particular states, so that there's a cost here that cannot be. So you can't have the state government in the state capital imposing certain rulership, traditional rulership systems on minority communities and the rest of it. So we should look at that. In terms of distribution of power, we should look at where actually states and regions should be protecting their people. You know, state police has been mentioned. Again, I don't think many of the states in Nigeria should be running their police. So we can, at that level, look at interstate compact, where you have regional police structure, but that can be responsible to the people, you know, of those regions. Then lastly, and I think an article is going to come on this, we should look at Chapter 2 of the Constitution. I know my colleagues always talk about Chapter 2, which is the fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy, that actually make, you know, certain social development issues and making social investment actually a responsibility of government. And my colleagues usually fixate on that it's not justiciable. I don't think it needs to be justiciable. I think we just need to recognize this as, you know, what I would argue as the primary policy document, social development document of Nigeria. Almost like our SDG that we've had in the 1970s, before we even had SDG in the last decade or so. Those are the things we should begin to look at. So how do we activate that and incorporating, in fact, map our development agenda, rolling plans, and all of that into to make sure that the targets in Chapter 2 are met, and to set the target and the milestones, you know, and when we are supposed to meet it. Those are things we should begin to look at in actually redesigning the Constitution.
All right, so do you believe Nigeria needs constitutional amendment or a complete constitutional overhaul to achieve true federalism?
Whatever we call it, amendment, complete overhaul, what's important is these issues that I've mentioned, because you would notice something has happened, and I did mention in the article that you referred to at the beginning of this conversation. You know, you would notice that what has happened is that civic groups, you know, are all about, let us have this, you know, this big bang constitutional conference of constituent assembly, where these key issues will be, you know, will be addressed, and we are going to make decisions, you know, on them. And then you find governments, including politicians, when they're in opposition, were part of the True Federalism and having restructuring. Once they don't come into government, then you have the, you know, stochastic, you know, thinking around the edges amendment. what is important is that we need to reconcile those two things. Whether it's going to be by way of amendment, we can no longer ignore the key issues that government likes to say, oh, it's a no-go area, you cannot discuss that. Things like state police, by now, the idea that in spite of the security challenges of the country, state police is not out on the agenda. So whether it is government-led, government can no longer ignore the important work that some very serious civic groups have done. Think about PRONAPO that was led by Anthony Enaoro and Wole Soyinka. Think about what the Patriot now led by Chifanya Oku. Think about what they've done. Think about what different regions have done. Think about what Dawn Commission, has done in terms of the regional plan for its region. Think about what they have other institutions like that across the country. The Southeast Governors Forum, for example, that even at some point is collaborating with the Dawn Commission in the West. You cannot ignore this crisis and say you think around the edges and you go around the country, you don't even mobilize the people, when important voices in all these constituencies are spoken, and they've identified key areas that need to be addressed. So we need to bring it together. If it's not going to be a conference, a government that is very serious to be able to draw up a proper agenda, for a serious amendment of the Constitution, based on all of the key issues that have been that have been identified by these very, very serious nationality and civic groups across the country.
So how would properly structured federalism impact national cohesion and reduce ethnic suspicion?
Absolutely. The first thing is that, for you to be able to address anything, you need to be able to confront it. You can no longer sidestep it, So, continue to maintain the rhetoric of the unity of Nigeria is non-negotiable and all of that no longer makes sense because the country is free anyway. So once we address these key issues, it's in fact the way, how do you allay the fear of the minorities? The minorities, I don't imagine that a minority of a population of 100,000 is thinking about creating a country of their own. They just want to be safe in their land and their communities. They want to be in charge of their affairs. They also want equitable distribution, Communities in the Niger Delta that are, in the front line of receiving the negative backlash of exploitation of natural resources simply want, to be protected, and they want enough of those resources to come back to actually develop their communities, communities that today can no longer farm in the Northwest because of banditry. They need security. So if you don't address these issues, you are not going anywhere. So maintaining a rhetoric of national cohesion without addressing those key issues is actually a recipe for disaster, which I think we need to address very, very urgently now, because it's staring us in the face more urgently than it ever was at any time since the Civil War.
All right, so critics say politicians can use the term restructuring selectively. So what clarity do Nigerians need on its meaning?
It is what we've been saying since restructuring. What do you restructure? The division of power in the country, and not just mere division to say, look, from my experience as a country, what has failed, what has worked, if federal government has not worked in certain areas, can we devolve it into, or at least remit it constitutionally into the states or into the regions, local government structure. We need to talk about proper local government structure. What does it mean? And then how is it going to be done? Fiscal equalization. What should be the basis for fiscal equalization? Should it be a bland, you have so much population, we give money to you, or we make equalization targeted at particular human-centered development? Because the whole purpose of population is that there are people. So what do people need? People need services. They need education, they need health, they need infrastructure. Can we use equalization to target that rather than from top end, say we give money to people, on the basis of population? All of these are what is what you, resource control has been said. Again, that's one of those tags. The important thing for me in resource control is that communities or zones or regions that see the negative backlash of production of resources from these areas should have a measure of contribution first to the regulation of how those things are done, and also to sufficient fiscal allocation from them. These are the things, over a period of time, we can discuss all of these key issues. We discussed local government the last time. We could discuss cooperative federalism, how in spite of division of power, the center and the states or state to state can actually collaborate to jointly provide services to the people. These are the things, in my view, that restructuring, mean. How we then answer those questions, the principle by which we answer them are the things we need to discuss.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. It was really good to have you on The Big Story.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And that's where we wrap things up on the Big Story segment of our breakfast show. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the social listening segment. Just stay with us.